Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, think about this for a second. What if the world you see around you, the solid, real stuff, what if it isn't really out there? What if it's more like a personalized simulation built inside your own mind? This week, we're diving into some really fascinating, maybe even radical ideas suggesting we're not just watching reality unfold, we're actually, well, sculpting it. Our source material for this deep dive, it comes from a really interesting mix. We've got cutting-edge research on optics and the brain, alongside some deep spiritual wisdom. We're looking at documents from Michael L. Matthews, who's VP for Global Learning and Innovation at Oral Roberts University and has written quite a bit on Define Light. So think modern science experiments, neuroscience findings, and then how they connect, surprisingly perhaps, with ideas from sacred texts, specifically the Bible.
Yeah, and our goal today, our mission, if you like, is pretty important. We want to try and bridge that gap, understand how these pieces fit together. How does physical light, spiritual truth, and our own conscious perception, how do they actually interact? Because the implication, the thing you might take away from this, is that understanding this connection is maybe the key to seeing yourself as a real co-creator of your own experience.
Okay, let's get into that. Starting with the science, just like the sources do. The basic idea is the world we see isn't exactly the world as it is. It's the version our brain lets us see. Why does the brain do that? Why is it such an aggressive editor?
Well, mostly for survival. I mean,
Huh?
think about the sheer amount of information processing going on. We're talking 86 billion neurons working constantly. If your brain tried to process every single thing coming in, you'd just be overwhelmed, right? Frozen. So its main job is keeping you oriented, keeping you safe, keeping you functional. It's not aiming for a perfect photo of the universe. It's building a working model, a predictive model based on what seems most essential.
Okay, so the brain's modeling existence, not just passively watching. And this is where light comes in, the physics of it. The sources mention research showing light isn't just about enabling sight, it's somehow fundamental to actually building our perception.
That's exactly right. And the work in optical neuroscience here is, well, it's pretty stunning. Researchers have shown they can send controlled pulses of light directly into specific brain cells. And even with no actual visual input from the outside, they can literally trigger or change what someone perceives.
Wow.
Yeah, it's not just making them see a flash. It shows that light can activate the neural patterns that are the experience of sight. The data really suggests light helps us become, in a way, what the mind is visualizing. It physically activates the circuitry of expectation.
Hold on. If light pulses can trigger a perception, like a phantom image, doesn't that kind of imply our whole visual world might be? Well, a very sophisticated, useful hallucination, built for survival.
That's precisely the implication, yes. And the mechanism that maintains this sophisticated internal reality is what the source material calls the optics of the mind.
Hmm.
It's not passive reception. It's intense filtering. Your brain is getting hit with trillions of bits of sensory data constantly.
Trillions. That's hard to even imagine.
It is, but it filters almost all of that out, down to maybe a few thousand bits actually processes consciously. And here's the key. It tends to allow input that fits what it already expects, and importantly, what it values.
But wait, is that just confirmation bias? We see what we expect. How does the source material make this more than just seeing what we want to see versus tuning into some kind of truth frequency?
That's a really critical point. The difference, as presented here, is in the quality of that filter. The sources emphasize that your personal history, your emotional state, whether you're operating from fear or curiosity or maybe gratitude, even your moral compass, these actually shape the physical structure of those brain filters.
Ah, okay. So it's deeper than just a cognitive bias.
Exactly. We're talking about physiological pathways getting primed. If your internal world is, say, cynical or hostile, your brain literally gets better at spotting signals that confirm threats or scarcity. And it might filter out things that suggest grace or abundance because they don't fit the expected pattern.
So being cynical isn't just a mood. It's potentially causing my brain to actively select data that keeps me cynical.
That's the argument, precisely, which leads to that powerful statement in the sources. You don't see the world as it is, you see it as you are. The quality inside dictates the experience outside. So if our minds are sculpting reality, the next logical step is looking at the quality of the light we let in.
Right. If we're constantly taking in darkness, negativity, fear-based media, cynicism, the material suggests we're doing more than just feeling bad. We're literally dimming the lens. That feels physical.
Like a real consequence. It's presented as exactly that, a physical consequence, because those brain pathways get strengthened by repetition. The light we allow into our consciousness, the information we consume, where we put our focus, the emotional energy we cultivate, that becomes the very mechanism for maintaining or changing those pathways. So when we intentionally let in light, which the sources define as things like learning, love, gratitude, faith, we start building new neural structures, ones that are actually receptive to a higher quality of input. It's like recalibrating perception from basic survival mode towards, well, creation mode.
Which makes illumination the key factor here. The material calls light, both the physical kind and the spiritual kind, the currency of consciousness. And thinking back to those optical experiments you mentioned, light actually rewiring pathways. Yeah, that makes currency sound less like poetry and more like physics.
Absolutely. And this is where philosophy and science really meet up, around this idea of generating meaning. The brain uses light, uses input to make sense of things, to create coherence out of what might otherwise seem like chaos. It hates randomness. It needs a story. So the sources argue we don't just find meaning out there in the world, we actively generate it, using the light input we choose to focus on. And our beliefs. They act like prisms.
And if those beliefs, those prisms, are maybe cracked or distorted by old hurts or negative expectations, then the light passing through bends into a distorted view of reality. Okay, this feels like the perfect place to pivot. This need for meaning, for coherence. It's where the science story and the spiritual story seem to converge, both pointing to the same principle: light transforms, illumination changes things.
Indeed. The bridge gets very narrow right here. Science shows light helps define our reality in space and time through brain modeling. The spiritual tradition then asks, okay, but where does the ultimate truth come from? The source code for reality itself. And the spiritual material answers with a metaphysical claim. God is light.
So not just a nice metaphor like God being a helpful lighthouse. It's saying light is fundamental to the nature of existence.
Exactly. The source highlights the Gospel of John with that really powerful statement. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. So when we talked earlier about tuning our consciousness, the implication here is that we're trying to align our internal prism with the frequency of that foundational light.
And the sources don't just talk about one kind of light, spiritually speaking. They mention a full light spectrum. Components of the word, things like wisdom, mercy, justice, joy, love. That's fascinating. These virtues presented almost like wavelengths of divine energy.
They're framed as operating principles, really. The tools that can help recalibrate our thinking, heal those emotional distortions we talked about, and clarify our vision. Think of it like an OS update for consciousness. So, physics might say light defines space and time. Faith traditions, like the one cited here, say divine light defines purpose and destiny. The real work is integrating both kinds of illumination.
Which brings us to integrating knowledge. The sources argue strongly against keeping these separate, like education without revelation. It's just information. It doesn't necessarily transform you. You're filling the hard drive, maybe, but not changing the processor.
Right. And the flip side is also true. Religion without education can sometimes drift into just ritual without real understanding. It might generate passion, but lack the intellectual tools to navigate a complex world. So the deep dive really emphasizes needing both. Training the neural pathways, the scientific how, and the spiritual pathways, the scriptural why. They need to merge for genuine wholeness.
So what does that merge actually look like, practically, for someone listening? It starts, the sources say, with realizing you are an active creator through your perception. Every moment. You're not just a passive camera recording the world.
Absolutely. Every thought you choose to focus on, every image you let settle in your mind, every word you speak. These are described as beams of light. They are, or in a very real sense, shaping the visual, experiential contours of the world you live in. That's the physiological reality behind the spiritual encouragement.
Let's revisit that neurospiritual link again, because it feels like the absolute core of this. When the Apostle Paul wrote, "Be transformed by the renewing of your mind," that ancient instruction is finding echoes in modern neuroscience, isn't it?
It really is, because we now understand neuroplasticity. The brain isn't fixed. It physically rewires itself based on experience, and especially based on internal states, our beliefs, our feelings. And this rewiring, this change in perception, the growth of new neural connections, it happens using the light we allow in. If that light is consistently of the highest quality aligned with wisdom, love, truth, then the reality model the brain builds tends to be more robust, more free, less constrained by fear.
The sources use a great analogy for this, a really visceral one from Matthew's Gospel in the Message translation. It talks about your eyes being like windows for your body. If you open those windows wide with expectation, wonder, belief, your whole inner self fills up with light.
But
Yeah.
if you live squinty-eyed, as it puts it, meaning if you're guarded, suspicious, cynical, then your inner world becomes like a musty cellar. Basically, closing the blinds or squinting defensively at the world guarantees a darker, more confined reality, no matter how bright it might be outside.
Before we start to wrap up, I want to circle back to a specific scientific detail you mentioned from the sources. It really underlines the sheer power of light, why it's way more than just for seeing.
You mean the supersolid example? Yeah, that is pretty mind-bending. Italian scientists using high-energy laser light managed to create a state of matter called a supersolid, something that's simultaneously solid and liquid. It breaks the usual rules of physics.
Exactly. And dropping that detail in here, it feels significant. If focused light energy can make physical matter behave in impossible ways, make it fluid. Imagine what focused conscious light our intention can do to the much more fluid reality of our own neural pathways. It shows reality is fundamentally changeable.
And we see attempts to harness this everywhere, don't we? Science is actively using light energy to shape experience. Think about virtual reality headsets completely altering sensory input, or light and frequency patches in medicine. Even things like light-infused water therapies, whatever those entail, the underlying impulse is there.
Yeah.
Using illumination to actively reshape reality seems almost intuitive because the principle itself feels universal.
Which brings us to the unavoidable conclusion drawn in the source material. Reality isn't fixed, it's fluid. It responds constantly to the light we allow into our consciousness. So if you want to change your reality, you have to change your light.
Yeah, that's the core message. We've looked at how brain science, the need to filter and model, and spiritual traditions talking about divine light, they actually point to the same truth. Illumination, in whatever form, seems to be the primary creative force in our conscious experience.
And crucially, that light doesn't just show you the world out there. It also acts like a mirror. It reveals you. When we intentionally choose to polish our inner lenses with that spectrum of divine truth, wisdom, gratitude, love, mercy, the reflection we see, our experienced reality, becomes clearer, more whole.
So, maybe something to think about this week. If your thoughts, the images you hold, your core beliefs, if these are the prisms bending the light of the universe into your personal understanding, what's one distortion, maybe just one that you've kind of accepted as just how things are? What distortion are you ready to try and remove from that mental lens right now to get a clearer view? Because that choice, that decision to adjust the prism, that's where co-creation really begins.